We're live.
This is the second show I've done today. The first show I did today, I think, was at 12 noon. Is that right, Christina?
Yes.
Down at the AOL studios, where they do these amazing interviews with show business people. And they asked me to do the interview with Frank Oz and Derek DelGaudio, who is a stunning magician who's doing a one-man show in New York. Frank Oz is directing it. It's called In and of Itself. It's on 15th Street on the East Side. If you can possibly get to this, you will you will thank me. It's going to be running for the rest of the year. But the AOL thing, they can find it. People can find this on AOL, right, Christina?
Yes, there's a link.
It's called what? What's the thing called?
AOL Build.
AOL Build. It's in their shows section. I don't know. But I was very nervous doing it because it was like 20 minutes, but it's so different from this. We won't dwell on that. These 39 Republican senators who are undecided. I mean, somebody tweeted me saying, it's wrong to say Marco Rubio is undecided because in the end, he will cave and he'll go along with McConnell. That may be true, but the important thing in the expression of how weak this whole thing is that tonight Marco Rubio is afraid of saying that he will vote for this. He's afraid of saying he'll vote for it, even if he is going to vote for it. That's really, really important. How many Democrats were undecided on, did you have 39 Democrats in the Senate who were undecided on Obamacare? Not for one day. Not for one day were 39 Democrats undecided on Obamacare. This is just an extraordinary situation that we're seeing, an extraordinary demonstration of weakness, and it's a massive weakness. It doesn't mean that Mitch McConnell won't, in the end, find a way to make it gel. It does mean that Senate observers like me who believe we've seen everything or, almost everything, do not know how he can do it. And that doesn't happen much. I mean, people who are experienced Senate hands know what's possible, what's impossible, and very rarely, once, every several years, are we surprised by how something happens. And so everybody I know says they don't see a way. They do not see a way for it to happen. But, that's not worth as much as it used to be worth before the universe got, knocked upside down by Donald Trump. So but you couldn't be in a better position tonight. If you're someone who's depending on Obamacare, if you're someone who wants Obamacare to stay, you couldn't possibly be in a better position than you're in tonight. It can get better. They can officially quit in July and drop the whole thing. Then you can relax. But you couldn't ask for more this week. What else did we do in the TV show? I can't remember. Are there any questions out there?
We do have some questions.
Go ahead. What?
Mike would like to know, did President Obama fumble on Russia last October?
I don't think so. I think he did everything he could. And, he's a very responsible person. And that's a thing that the media doesn't understand. They do not understand being responsible. And remember, the news media is incapable of looking at anything in the frame in which it was done. So everyone in the news media is going to look at what did President Obama do about Russian interference in the election. They're going to look at that from their 2017 perspective, as opposed to what the options felt like in August of 2016 for the President of the United States in an unprecedented situation. I have absolutely no criticisms of how the President handled it. I have no criticisms about how the administration handled it. I don't know that I would have had a better idea if I was working in the White House at the time. I understand. I understand why the president showed restraint where he did, and I understand why the president was forceful where he was. Having a one-on-one conversation with Putin is as forceful as you can be. And he did that, and even the Washington Post article says that that apparently inhibited Russia's further actions. But anyway, so I'm not a critic of the president on that.
Lori would like to know, why would the Senate Judiciary Committee want FISA information from the FBI?
Because they are curious about some of the unmasking that occurred with some of this information. But look, I'm guessing. We don't know. But it's hard for me to sit here and guess what that's about. But it's okay with me if they get it.
Tina would like to know, if this healthcare bill does pass, can the next administration repeal it?
Yep, you can do that with all laws. Everything can be repealed. Every bill you pass, next week, you could repeal the week after that, or some Congress down the road can repeal it. Nothing. The only things that are kind of permanent in this government are constitutional amendments. Those things are awful hard to get rid of. So anything short of a constitutional amendment is temporary. It always has been. And some things get really solid roots, and they hang on very, very strongly. Like Social Security. But everything can be repealed.
Sue would like to know, she thinks the media should stop attending the White House sessions to make a point. Do you think that's possible, or would it?
No, it's not, because it's a business. The White House press corps is just a business. That's really all it is. It's not an important area of American journalism. I know it wants to think it is, because American journalism desperately wants to inflate its importance about everything. But the tradition of having a White House press corps began not in the White House, but began in city halls around the country, where you had city hall reporters, and all they did was sit in city hall and wait for the mayor or a city councilor to say something. That's all they did. They didn't go out and chase stories about what's wrong with city government. They didn't go out and find out how city government was failing people. They just sat there and waited. They thought the easiest way for us to, print stuff for the paper tomorrow is to have the mayor say something. And they just sat there, waited for him to say something. And so that kind of lazy way of covering government was eventually brought to the White House, and they eventually built a room for them in the White House. And they eventually allowed TV cameras and all that stuff. But nothing important that I'm aware of has ever come out of the White House press corps. Woodward and Bernstein were not on the White House press corps when they were doing the most important investigative pieces of the White House in history. They were just Metro reporters. They were very low-ranking reporters at the Washington Post who began by investigating a burglary, which is how Watergate began, a burglary at the Democratic Party headquarters. And so, it's a terrible, terrible way to do journalism, to sit in a room and wait for the office holder to, dispense the press release of the day. It's terrible. So you're not going to hear me complaining about how they're treated in there and whether they're allowing cameras or not. I don't care. I don't care whether they allow cameras. Why would we possibly care about whether there are cameras there? These people who stand up in that room are doing nothing but spouting lies and propaganda. I don't care about covering that. And Trump loves every second that the news media spends complaining about how the news media is being treated. He loves that for two reasons. One, he believes correctly that his voters hate the news media, so he's a hero for treating them badly, number one. Number two, every minute spent talking about that is not spent talking about the truly awful things that Trump did today, or may have done in the Russia investigation. So, you know, it's not a thing I have any real sympathies about. You know, the Congressional Press Corps is in a similar kind of situation, but they're much, much, much better. Because they occasionally, you know, the Speaker of the House has his sort of press briefings, and they're propagandistic and they're relatively pointless. But every once in a while, you know, there's a good question. I usually learn something when, you know, Luke Russert would ask Paul Ryan a question or John Boehner a question, but not a lot, you know. But it's very rare that anything interesting comes out of that, because they are practiced politicians and they're practiced at not saying anything. Mitch McConnell, there's a place set up outside the Senate chamber where, you know, the leader can just walk up to a microphone whenever he wants to, and all the cameras gather. And, you know, Harry Reid had the same thing, you know, where they take whatever he's going to say. But the other thing that happens in the Senate that's so great is that when the senators leave the chamber, having just voted or made a speech or something like that, and they go out to the elevator to go down the 3 floors to get on the little subway that takes them back to the Russell Building or the Dirksen Building or the Hart Building, reporters can literally chase them down the hall. And they can chase them down the hall with their cameras on their shoulders and all this stuff. And you see Casey Hunt and Kelly O'Donnell doing this. And that is so much better than anything that the White House Press Corps ever does, sitting there in their little chairs like the obedient students in first grade, you know. Watch the kind of wide open way that reporters are allowed to operate in the Senate is really fantastic to watch, you know, and they're really energetic about it. Some people are really energetic. It doesn't mean they get gold, you know, but, you know, every single piece of video that I was given today that I could play on the show about a senator talking about healthcare or something was one of our people grabbing John McCain in the hallway. You know, one of our people grabbing Lindsey Graham in the hallway. You know, that stuff. And the interesting thing about the dynamics of that is they tend to say somewhat more candid things in that less guarded environment. And so the healthiest press corps I've ever seen in Washington is that free movement press corps in the Senate, where they can just run all over the buildings and chase them down the hallways and all that stuff. And, you know, the truth is they're very polite about it. I mean, they do walk along with them, and you've seen this great video of Hallie Jackson doing one that they turned into a promo here, of staying with a senator down the hallway and keeps asking all these questions. I mean, that stuff is real, and it's dynamic, and it's alive, and in the day-to-day business of the Senate, you can find out some really interesting things once in a while, like, oh, okay, this guy is now against the bill. That's really important, you know, because you're keeping a vote count, and you just learned that, you know. But the White House has no comparable moment. There's nothing like it. Nobody can, you know, follow the vice president down the hallway, or you know, follow the White House counsel around the corner and ask him a legal question, or, you know, it's set up as the room in which the propaganda is dispensed, and different administrations have different values about how truthful they want to be, and about how revealing they want to be, and about how propagandistic or non-propagandistic they want to be. And I think the most important moments that I've ever seen that have occurred in the White House press briefing room have all been by the president himself. And one president in particular, President Obama, going into the White House press briefing room in response spontaneously to current, usually horrible events, like mass shootings. That's important. That's not propaganda. That's a real moment. But I can't remember. I don't think there's ever been a White House briefing run by a press secretary that is memorable. You know, like, oh, we want to, it might be interesting and produce a little bit of heat in that day's news. But the idea that, like, you know, anything that happens in that room would ever show up on the page of a serious history book that's just crazy.
We've had this question about a dozen times tonight. Who do you think is an up-and-coming young Dem to watch for?
Well, you know, you can be up and coming at any age. Okay, so Elizabeth Warren is only in her second term. And I'm not sure young is the word people use for her, but as senators go, she's really young at heart. As is Al Franken, who I can testify is not young. Kamala Harris is as an attorney general and district attorney. She's definitely somebody to watch. I've been watching her since she was the district attorney in San Francisco. And at that time, when I saw her as district attorney in San Francisco, I predicted that this is the first, you know, strong, will do very well, if not win, you know, woman candidate of color for president of the United States. I could see she was going to go on to run for attorney general and win that. I could see where Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein were in their Senate careers and in their age, and I could see that one of those seats would open up after Kamala Harris won the attorney general job in California, and she would run for one of those seats. She would become a senator. It's all working as easily as it was to predict. Who else on the Democratic side? I'm forgetting people. I'm not thinking of everybody right now. But those, look, I guess it matters that those are the first three that I think of. So
we're going to leave it there for tonight. We'll be back.